Chuck, Chuck, what's the end time on this?
I think he's offline.
Okay.
It's up to us then. Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
It's an hour. It's an hour long. Bye.
Okay.
Can't hear you, Chuck.
I'm not hearing anything. Now I hear you.
I'm not either.
I think we can all hear each other, but not Chuck.
Correct.
Yes.
Human error. How's that? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now can you hear me okay?
There you are.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, of course, we start the show with human error, and that's why this show is live. And I want to say hello, good morning to everybody. It's January 9th, 9:30 on the West Coast, 12:30 on the East Coast, and 5:30 in the UK and around the world. And this is the second edition of Westdoc Online. Thank you very much for tuning in. I think we're actually on the air right now. There's that moment of limbo. Since doing the first show, people have said to me, why are you doing this? What is this all about? And I think the simple answer really is that I'm doing it because I can. I sort of had an epiphany a while back that YouTube Live goes out around the world, Facebook Live goes out around the world, and WestDocOnline.com can go live out around the world, and there's an unlimited number of people that can actually be exposed to whatever conference or panel or discussion that you want to have. And as one of my panelists a moment ago, as we were warming up, said, yes, but you have to be aware of it. And of course, it's the old adage, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there, does it make any noise? And so are we making any noise? And I think we're beginning to make some noise. I'm getting a lot of feedback. As a matter of fact, you could probably hear a bell ringing. I just got a couple of texts from friends of mine who were saying, hello, Richard, thank you for the text, and saying you can see it. Of course, I don't see anything on my side over here. Before I forget, I want to say on our website, if you're watching this at www.westdoconline.com, there's a little tab in the lower right-hand corner of most of the pages that says chat here. And I think it's going to work. I'm not sure. I've tested it, and it worked. And if you want to ask a question of any of the panelists, put in a question, and we'll see if it works. I'm not sure it will work. Mark your calendars, please. 2 weeks from today is January 23rd. It's our next show. Not by coincidence, it happens to be the day of the Academy Award nominations. And our plan, and the nominations are usually announced at 5:30 in the morning West Coast time. We're going to go on the air at 9:30 in the morning on West Coast time. And I hope to bring you at least 3 or 4 of the documentary nominees, hopefully a couple in the feature doc and a couple in the documentary short. And I must say, having been through that experience myself, it's a mind-blowing, game-changing, life-changing experience, and you don't really realize it. I mean, you may realize it intellectually, but you don't realize what a big deal it is until it actually happens to you. Future shows on Westdoc Online are going to be about production companies and producers. We're going to do network buyers. I'm going to get some of the top network buyers from all the name brand networks that you know. I want to do a special show about festivals. I'm especially enamored with Hot Docs. If you haven't been to Hot Docs, it's the largest documentary festival in North America. And they do something really unique there over a 10-day period of time, over a half a dozen different theatrical venues. They run 100 feature docs, and they sell 150,000 tickets to documentaries that nobody ever heard of before because they're all brand new docs. So we're going to do something about hot docs and individual documentary films. Make sure you sign up. At the bottom of the Westdoc Online website is an email. um, sign-up sheet so we can send you notices of when the next shows are. At the moment, we're planning on doing every other Tuesday, every 2 weeks, and I'm thinking this is a good time. I'm not sure. Maybe Richard's getting hungry because it's lunchtime on the East Coast, but we'll see. So what we want to do first is I'm going to introduce the panel. We're going to go around to each of them for 30 to 60 seconds maybe, and they can introduce themselves one at a time, and I'll cue them in. And so here is our panel for today, which is Richard Abramowitz and of Abramarama, and Christine Dewey of ROCO, and Orly Ravid, the founder of the Film Collaborative, and Jonathan Dana, who is a longtime executive producer, director, and executive at Code Entertainment. But why don't I start with you, Richard, if you want to give us a little moment or two about what you do and your background in Abramarama, please.
Sure. I have been a distributor, producer, etc. For a very long time, since the very earliest of the 80s. We at Abramarama, our focus is on nonfiction. We have, over the last few years, focused almost exclusively on music films and social issue films. A lot of what we've done is service deals where there's no transfer of rights, and the producers, content owners come in as partners, and we're collaborators and consultants. We also have funding for P&A for production and P&A for music-themed films. Most of what we do now going forward is really music doc.
Great. Christine, you want to pick it up there, please?
Sure, thank you. So I am managing director of the international division of ROCO Films. So my particular focus is working with our small collection of highly curated documentaries. They tend to be story-driven documentaries with some kind of social issue focus. And I work on the international side of the market, working with distributors and public broadcasters internationally who license these kinds of documentary films. I want to talk just a second about ROCO, the company. We have an educational division that distributes documentaries to the U.S. educational market. They work with semi-theatrical and educational rights and distribute to colleges and universities and organizations, which is something I'll want to talk about a little bit later as a market for documentaries. And then we also more recently have a productions division that works with a small number of films to get involved earlier and participate in helping to find funding for documentary projects. And I'll leave it there.
Great. Orly?
Hi, yes. I'm the founder of the Film Collaborative, also an entertainment attorney. The Film Collaborative is a nonprofit focused on distribution. It is a distribution educator, so we have all sorts of resources, including Distropedia, a lot of case studies, a book called Selling Your Film Without Selling Your Film, How Not to Sign a Film Contract. The blog is information written about distribution. So we also provide distribution services without taking rights. We monetize film festival distribution. We're the best in that space worldwide. Sales on a very, very boutique basis. Video on demand distribution, also quite on a boutique basis. But the bottom line is we provide services without taking rights. And we help filmmakers navigate the without getting screwed.
So I don't think there's anything we can do about it particularly, but your audio is a little electronically not so great in and out. We do understand what you're saying, and we got the essence of it, and I'm not sure what the answer is.
Yeah, me neither. I couldn't.
Yeah, so, but we'll just continue at this point. Jonathan, you want to do your brief intro, please?
Sure. I started in the film business in 1971, making and distributing actually drug education films, and then came to LA to make a documentary feature, which was widely theatrically released, and that got me into the fiction side of the business as well. And since that time, I've been a producer and a distributor and a producer's rep. Mostly, I've also have an entrepreneurial side. I was one of the original investors in withoutabox.com, which we ultimately sold to IMDb, Amazon. And most of my time right now is spent executive producing movies, both documentaries and features, dramatic features.
So let's continue with you, Jonathan, if we can, for a minute. I think one of the interesting appeals for me, and I think for a lot of filmmakers out here, is that you're kind of a hybrid, right? And that you started out in the documentary world with a, how shall I characterize this film? Sort of, well, why don't you characterize and tell us a little bit about Sandstone and about what we discussed earlier about how you kind of learned about the business through that film, if you can.
Well, the thing that I love most about Sandstone is that it's still in distribution 45 years later. So I'll give a plug to indieflix.com. Anybody can go there and watch the movie. It's a cinema verite documentary about a very famous 60s and 70s retreat called Sandstone, which was an open marriage and open sexuality retreat made famous by Alex Comfort in The Joy of Sex, and later by Gay Talese in The Neighbor's Wife. We took the movie theatrically across the country over an 18-month period, and it was extraordinary educational experience where I learned about how you get yourself on TV shows and how you get newspapers to write about your movie. And that education was very useful. Eventually I got a job at Samuel Goldwyn Company, and that combination of experience, firsthand experience, was useful. And from there I sort of carried on making and buying and selling films. It all exploded with the pay TV revolution that started when HBO went satellite, and all of us who had more than a half hour's worth of experience got the benefit of being lifted up by corporate America at that point, who was throwing money at it.
How do you get yourself in newspapers and on television when you have a film, be it scripted or nonfiction?
Well, it's probably still the same way. Richard is probably more able to discuss that right now because he does that every day, really for a living. I'm not specifically doing that any time, but basically you get yourself on the road. You get a publicist that you can trust, that you have a message, you hammer it away, and then you have some angle, either subject matter or talent, that is media friendly. And you just keep driving the message. Now it's, in those days it was, pretty simple. There were a few newspapers and TV stations in each market. Now, of course, we have this whole melange of outlets.
Are you currently involved in any documentary nonfiction projects, or is it all scripted?
No. I'm actually the two movies, one in post and one that we're shooting right now, both epic in some senses, long-form music documentaries. And then I did a kind of an extreme sports movie that I was a producer on this year that's now streaming worldwide on Netflix. But the two that we're working on now, one's in post and one's in production, are pretty substantial size music films. I've done a number of music films over the year, which I have an affinity for and which seem to have a market, which Richard and I, who've overlapped for decades and many aspects, also share that interest.
Can you tell us what the subjects are of the music films?
Yeah, one of them is a jazz movie. It's a multi-part, I guess it's technically a series because it's a multi-part doc on Wayne Shorter, the jazz saxophone player, and through the course of that movie, it basically takes the history of jazz from the early Art Blakey, Miles Davis days up through current days of Herbie Hancock and Esperanza Spalding, all told through the eyes and life of Wayne Shorter, who, in addition to being maybe probably maybe arguably the most brilliant jazz composer of our era and sax player, but it also tells a larger story of American and international culture, because Wayne is so important internationally. And the other film, which we've been fairly quiet about, which is now out and officially online, is a movie I'm doing with Dan Geller and Dana Goldfein, which is the fourth. We're also doing another one, a fifth project together, about the story and times of Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah, from its inception to its various incarnations.
Wow,
and we're
that's
going to
great.
create some.
That's out?
Some new versions of it. No, that's in. I'd say in mid stages of production, mid stages of shooting. We've been shooting for about a year, and we probably have another year of shooting.
It's an unbelievably great song, obviously, and Leonard Cohen, I'm a huge fan of.
Yeah, and it's an equally great story. And then we'll wrap, of course, stuff about Leonard's life in it, but it's more about the process of creation.
So in music shows like the Wayne Shorter show, do you have significant music clearance issues, or is that all taken care of because you're dealing with the talent, or do you not even want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, there's always music clearance issues. The example most that I give is I did a movie. I guess it's over 10 or more years ago called Tom Dowd and the Language of Music, which is a really extraordinary film. I can say that because I was a producer, but I didn't direct it. It's a really brilliant film, and one of the reasons my jobs as a producer on that movie was organizing the music clearances. And the irony of that was that all the music in that movie was controlled by one person ultimately, and it took a year to clear the music. So it's always an issue. On the Leonard Cohen movie, it took about 2 years to organize the music with Sony, who was cooperative, and we have the rights to all the major versions of the song, and that was a big part of organizing.
That's the master use license, you mean, from record companies, or not the?
Well, and the publishing and the singing, both. I mean, they're separate. It's a separate rights issues. Again, Richard can, talk probably elegantly on that. But both. You need both when you
right,
want to use
obviously.
the actual performances.
So, Richard, do you want to tell us a little bit about your business? And I'm especially intrigued by the whole music film idea, and the fact that you are sitting in front of the Beatles posters, for one, which is one of your latest films. And how did you get involved in having so many music films, and what are the implications of that for you as a film distributor?
Well, I was at a company in the 80s that released Stop Making Sense, the Jonathan Demme's Talking Heads concert film, which is, I think, generally considered one of the best concert films ever made. And I've always had an interest in music. And I've been in and out of that part of the business over the years. And then a few years ago, I was involved with a film called Pearl Jam 20, which was a celebration of 20 years of Pearl Jam. And it became obvious in working on that film, specifically how tribal fans of bands are and how accessible they are in a very cost-effective way. It's an audience that's predisposed to be interested in whatever you're presenting to them because they're avid fans. That cohort is particularly sensitive to it because they're the right age to be totally wired, to the point that when we didn't spend a penny in advertising that film, and we sold out shows in each 55 markets within an hour. And then we had the film. Those were early one-night event screenings. We started with a 7 o'clock, and then once that sold out, we added a 9:30. And then we were in on full runs, full traditional week runs, 5 shows a day, 7 days a week, in another 5 or 6 markets. And it started for me as a function of necessity. I was basically alone in a room. I didn't have the resources, either financial or staff, to engage in any kind of aggressive marketing or outreach. And so I sort of almost defaulted into figuring out that I needed a pre-sold audience, an audience that was ready to be activated once they were informed. And that combined with an interest in music and at, it was at a point when the music industry had already collapsed and was trying to find a way to rebuild itself. And that movie in particular, Pearl Jam 20, started out as basically a marketing piece to promote an album and a book, and the band wasn't touring, and they're very connected to their fans, and they wanted to do something that was going to maintain contact with them. And so this was a marketing budget to the extent that when we returned, when I called up the folks at Sony and said, I have all this money, where do you want me to send it? They actually didn't have a receivables column on their accounting because it was meant to be marketing money. So that's a rare and delightful call to make, to tell somebody you're giving them money they don't expect, rather than what people generally expect in the film business when, not taking a call when you do owe them money. So this was a nice reversal of that, and it was a great pleasure. And, once you do something right a couple of times, people, correctly or not, figure something. And it started, we just started approaching more labels and more managers and more musicians. And I've been working with Neil Young for 15 years, and so that's not a bad association to have. And they just started coming. The Beatles film, I knew one of the producers from another project. I know the CEO of Apple Corps, and the folks at Hulu were extremely eager to find out if the theatrical platform could coexist with theirs, and were thrilled to find out that not only could they coexist, but they could enhance. We've continued to do it. We've between me and my partners, we've probably done 100 music films, including Anvil about 8 or 10 years ago, which was a great pleasure and a great surprise, and a few more films with Pearl Jam, a few films with Green Day, a few other things brewing that we're almost ready to talk about. But we have a lineup mostly of that stuff, and it's been great. The labels have been very eager to do it because it's a way of promoting that not only is cost effective but can be profitable for them. I should also say we're also doing Jane right now, with National Geographic, Brett Morgan's film, which has been shortlisted for the Oscar feature length. So it's not exclusively music, but it's largely music that we do.
So can I ask from a business standpoint, obviously if you're doing a Neil Young film or somebody, a superstar, you have the built-in audience, but what if somebody walks in the door with somebody less known than Neil Young, known, or I'm just sort of curious as to how the business model works in general, to the degree that you can discuss it.
Well, we did a film a couple of years ago called Mistaken for Strangers about a band called The National, and they tour nationally. They sell out arenas, at least in Brooklyn, and they have a national presence. I think they were probably known most on a large scale. I think they did the theme song for maybe season 2 of Game of Thrones or something like that. But they're a really solid band. Mm-hmm. They play well, but they're not in that top echelon of super groups in terms of their visibility and their sales and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean they don't have an avid core of fans, and that's the beauty of working on music films. Is you have a devoted core, and as long as you spend appropriately. And when you're dealing with movies like this, you don't have to spend much at all, because most of the work is done on social media. There are some unavoidable costs in terms of, mastering the film and creating the DCPs, the physical computer drive on which the media is now held, and the loathsome VPFs, the virtual print fees that we're required to pay. It's basically key money to get into theaters. Unavoidable in many cases, depending upon the theaters. If you're dealing with the big chains, it's unavoidable. Some of the mom and pops, the independents, don't have them because they paid for their own equipment. A lot of the nonprofit theaters raise their own money, so we don't get caught up in that then. But the costs can be fairly limited.
Do you generally
And
take
it-
other than theatrical rights, or are you talking about just theatrical?
Well, it depends. I mean, much of this historically that we've done has been service deals for just theatrical. But the last year or year and a half, we've engaged in more what I'd call rights management, where we take everything. We're not licensing it. We're still working as a third party, as a consultant, but we will manage the rights. We'll work out to negotiate the deals, pitch to all the VOD platforms, TVOD, SVOD. We deal with the cable channels because we deal with them all as partners in distribution. We've worked with HBO and Showtime and Hulu and Amazon and National Geographic, all these outlets as theatrical partners. So we can just turn around and make the same call to them to pitch if we're representing rights for a producer that are beyond theatrical. We don't do non-theatrical.
Okay, I'm going to go on in a second, but I do want to take a break for a moment to thank our sponsors, which I neglected to do at the opening of the show, foolishly. And I want to tell you that we have 3 sponsors for this show, which I would encourage everybody, filmmakers, to use. There's LumaForge just came up as one of them, so I'll tell you a little bit. And the ironic, amazing part about having the 3 sponsors is that I know their products very well because I actually use all of them. LumaForge, as it turns out, I met Sam Messman, and I was starting a project, and we needed to share a station where we had 2 different shows going and assistant editors, so we had 4 workstations, and we're using Final Cut Pro 10 at the time, and their sharing was not as good then as Avid, and so they've come up with an incredible system. I actually purchased the first Jellyfish from LumaForge. They're a great company. Pond 5 is one of our sponsors, and they have the largest library of stock footage in the world. And so you think of them as a stock footage company, but actually, besides stock footage, they have music effects, they have 10,000 After Effects templates, and you can start with a free account and download stuff that's watermarked and put it in your project and then establish with them. They're really amazing. And then the other thing you need sometimes, a cameraman in another city, and when you're out of town, you should call up Jay at Media Central. I've known Jay for a long time because I've done projects all over the country and the world, and he's had this company since 1993, and he's in 111 countries. And the amazing part is he knows the best cameraman, and they have the latest, best equipment. So thank you, Jay at Media Central also. Christine, tell us, how is Roku the same or different than a Bramorama or XYZ distribution company? And you guys have music films too, or is it all nonfiction? And I know you're in educational distribution, which I want to do a separate show about at some point. But I'd like to hear a little more about Roku. And why is it all lowercase, and why is there an asterisk in your title?
Well, the origin of the name, the company started in 2000 by Annie Roney, and she was, at the time, we were just an international distributor, and she was looking for a name that would sound okay in all different languages, and it actually is the abbreviation of her last name, Roney, the first part, and then company, so it's an abbreviation for Roney Company. And the asterisk, was visually interesting and really charming. It becomes a little problematic when you're sending emails, so that's a more recent development. So, but anyway, so yeah, Roku started about, in 2000. We were focused on the international market. We were a hybrid sales agent distributor. And what I mean by that is, as a sales agent, we were going out to distributors in different territories and licensing rights to them to take on the distribution of the film in those territories. But we also have relationships with broadcasters and now digital platforms. And I think, like everybody, we in the last 10 years have made the transition from a market where what was really driving it was broadcast and pay TV and DVD to now much more of a digital focus. I think where we're different a little bit from a Bramorama is purely a distribution company, I would say. Richard, correct me if I'm wrong. Where we are a sales agent and distribution company. So in the last 2 years, we've started to move into the domestic market as a sales agent, meaning that we're taking on projects globally to represent both in the U.S. market to help find distribution deals in the U.S. market, and then also continuing the work we do in the international market. So we still have always been a company that focuses on a small number of story-driven documentaries, and we're sticking to that as we make this transition into the U.S. market. And so what that means is we are looking at, for example, getting ready to go into Sundance. We're looking at taking on a couple of projects that will represent as an agent, and then also we'll continue to do the whole picture distribution in the international market. And we see value in our perspective because we, over the last couple of years, have found ourselves as in the middle between watching what was happening in the U.S. market and seeing that these big digital companies who are coming in and making global offers for documentary films, the U.S. sales agents working in that space didn't always have an understanding of the value of the rights internationally. So we see ourselves as bringing to the table this international knowledge which can help give filmmakers an idea of what the value of those rights are and help them make good decisions about how they distribute their films in the U.S. market. And when we're lucky, we're working on a film that Abramarama has taken on for U.S. distribution. We've shared a couple of films, and that has worked really well because they have that the expertise to get a film out theatrically. That's not our expertise in the U.S. market. And we have the expertise to really do a robust distribution in the international market. So,
aren't you involved? Are you involved in Jane also?
We are not involved in Jane.
No, I thought you were.
Yeah. More recently, our educational division has been involved in the Inconvenient sequel. And we shared a film with Richard called Time to Choose. It's Charles Ferguson's really fantastic seminal work on global warming. And they did the U.S. distribution, theatrical distribution, and we came on board to do the international distribution.
So if a filmmaker came to you with a film that all rights were available, you in theory could say, well, I could give it to Richard or somebody else for theatrical to qualify it for Academy, whatever, and that we could help sell the film foreign, domestic television, educational, all of the above.
Right.
Everything but
Yeah.
theatrical, right?
We'd be lucky if Richard and Abramovich came on board to do the theatrical because they really do have the expertise to do that well. And we would be, yes, if we were in the position where we had an all rights opportunity, we would be working in partnership with the filmmakers on kind of trying to set up a both domestic distribution strategy in concert with an international distribution strategy that would really maximize the opportunities in the market. And what we're seeing is, as media becomes more global, so, all of a sudden you have, Abramarama's doing marketing and PR in the U.S., and people are starting to access that internationally. So we're seeing value in being able to sync up as much as you can these different, releases of the film. So if Abramarama takes a film out theatrically in the U.S. and we can kind of try to queue up a distribution in Australia and the UK, there's value in having kind of those happen together to take advantage of the marketing and PR campaigns that are starting to, again, have more global implications as social media becomes the way that documentary distributors and documentary filmmakers are reaching their audiences.
Do you do you get involved in films that are not complete, that are halfway done, or?
We do. Thanks for asking that question, Chuck. We've just in the last couple of years started to do that. My colleague Sue Turley is heading up our Rocco Productions division, and she is taking on just a small number of films where we feel we have the relationships in place that we would be able to bring on funders to help support getting the project made. Sue has been also cultivating relationships with filmmakers abroad who have interest in bringing films into the U.S. And so she's working with a couple of projects where they're being funded in part in Europe, and then they're looking for co-production funding out of the U.S. And Sue is helping to create those partnerships.
Great. Let's switch now, if we can, to Orly, hoping your audio is okay for a moment, because your film collaborative is takes a slightly different tact, I think, and I wish you would explain it to us, please, Orly.
Sure. I mean, does it sound better? I hope so.
Yes, it does. And I'm going to mute everybody else, so you're solo right now.
I love it. So, I mean, it's great because we're really complementary to the other companies on the panel in terms of actual distribution services. So, for example, Rocco does such a wonderful job in international sales and education distribution. Also does a lot of stuff domestically where we are not strong enough in a way most of the time. It sounds really bad. I just want to alert you to the fact that it sounds terrible to me. What do you think, Jeff?
We can understand what you're saying. It's not great, but we.
Okay. Oh, there we go. That's.
I was going to say we can understand what you're saying, but it could be better.
Okay.
Next show we'll have a special line come into your house. And
beautiful. I love it.
Get fiber next week. Okay.
You got it. All right. So look, one thing Film Collaborative does that the other companies, that most companies don't focus on, is film festival distribution. And in fact, we share films with Rocco on that front, where we're monetizing the film through thousands of film festivals around the world and making real money for filmmakers as well as elevating their profile. And so that's one core distribution service we provide. It's pretty unique, especially to the degree in which we do it in such a robust way.
You're monetizing it how?
Charging rental fees for the festival to show the film. I mean, we're not charging Sundance, but we're charging any non-A-list film festival, money to show the film. And then separately from that is the invitation to the director of the festival. That's a separate thing. So that aspect of film distribution we're really, really great at, and it's usually compatible with any other distribution or sales effort that the film is going through. And in fact, we have an initiative that is pairing what we do best with what other people, including Roku, do best, and putting together a vertically integrated complete distribution solution with all these different entities sort of collaborating together. That's called collaborative releasing. But, we are a nonprofit, and our first mission is education, right? So we provide all of those distribution services and all that information, those case studies, meaning to inform filmmakers about what their choices are in distribution without giving up their rights. Because this sounded so terrible, I'm going to close by saying, yes, we do the other types of distribution also, sales, video on demand, theatrical, but in a very different way. And we're not a documentary company, but we definitely have 2/3 documentaries in our lineup.
And I might also add, for those who don't know, that Orly happens to be an attorney and at one of the powerhouse Los Angeles firms, MSK, Mitchell Silverberg and Knupp, and how you balance being an attorney at some exorbitant rate and do a nonprofit at the other side is like amazing to me. So you must be juggling things all the time.
I'm organized. Thank you. I should note that MSK is also in DC and New York, but thank you for that. And
okay.
I'm just organized.
Jonathan, can you explain to us exactly what a producer's rep does and how it might apply in the nonfiction world and in both worlds? Because there are a lot of people in both worlds, but
I don't really think there's a whole lot of difference whether it's a documentary or a dramatic film, and it varies. I mean, a lot of the skill set are selling. So to some degree, a producer's rep can be a sales agent also, which means directly responsible for selling the movie. But I've been a producer's rep on movies where I wasn't selling the movie, and that was a condition of my coming on to the movie.
So what does that mean? What does the producer's rep do if you're not selling?
Well, I think that one analogy that I've used sometimes is it's like a tugboat captain, and the task is to kind of figure out a strategy for the film and then to guide it into shore or guide it into the dock in one piece. So in that regard, it's very similar to a producing function. So that on films of that type, sometimes I'll take a consulting producer credit rather than a rep credit, and then work with the sales agent. And another thing that you do is you pick the sales agent, because it becomes very specialized. You can pick the sales agent and then manage the sales team, either separately, internationally and domestically, or sometimes worldwide.
Does this apply, do you think, to documentary films too, or is it more?
I've done more on documentary films. It applies greatly on documentary films, but they have to be a certain type of film, and I'm not necessarily representative of everybody else because I have my own kind of set of preferences and stage of life and issues that I'm interested in or not interested in doing. So for me, I've always been more about if it's something if the film is something that I'm interested in, rather than necessarily the task or to have it be a specific revenue stream source. But no, I can think of a number of documentaries that the task is figuring out really kind of how to position the movie and what you're trying to get out of the movie, and then really figuring out what festival strategy might apply, and what combination of people you might need to bring in, what publicist is right for the picture, and what sales agent is not only right for the picture, but will be able to communicate well with you about the picture. Because sometimes when you make it's a little bit like who will guard the guards. You can make a deal with a sales agent. And Orly and I have worked on a couple of movies in that sort of a capacity together, and reverse roles actually on the second one, because it sometimes takes that kind of energy. Now, it works on movies where you have a special interest, so that it's not really about the money, and it works on bigger movies where there's resources to be able to handle both jobs.
Can I throw out the question here of what do you all think is the state of documentary films today? And let me preface it by saying that, as a member of the Motion Picture Academy, in the doc branch, there's 170 films were submitted this year, and I am required to watch, I forget what it was, 15%, so that's about 25 films, and I probably watched another 15, so that's 40 films. And if I watched 40 of the 170 this year, I would say 30 of them were probably really darn good, really good films, and very entertaining and high quality. So, but what's the business? Where does the business stand? If your name is not Joe Berlinger or Alex Gibney, can people make a living in documentaries, and what's the best way? And I'm throwing it open to anybody that wants to comment.
I'm hoping that maybe I sound better now. I want to say that it's a fabulous time to be a documentary filmmaker, and the monetization there's so many other avenues that filmmakers don't always think about. Festival revenue can be about up to $100,000. Educational revenue can be the same. Two separate strands right there. An SVOD deal, more likely now than ever, competing with television. And you can even do a linear television deal and an SVOD deal in many instances. Plus there's regular, transactional VOD. I can hear the sound is still terrible, but all I want to say is, I have films that I'm thinking in mind where they did every single thing I just mentioned, and even a physical DVD deal, and sometimes merchandise and events and public speaking fees and just layers and layers of ways to obviously change the world, which was the reason the documentary film was made, and make money back. And the other thing to remember is most documentaries aren't financed just by equity, right? They're often financed through fiscal sponsorship and soft money that doesn't have to get paid back. But I think it's a great time to be a documentary filmmaker. However, it is a glutted time, noted by the 170 that vied for shortlisting.
Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that too. I agree with everything Orly said, and I would add, I think that I agree with you, Chuck. The quality of documentary filmmaking has really advanced, and the craft has advanced in the last 15 years to such an extent that I think there are more audiences out there. There are more people connected to documentaries. There are more people who are talking about the fact that they love to watch documentaries. I would say we're in a bit of a transition period because at Roku, a big part of the last couple of years in terms of our distribution opportunities has been working with Netflix. And, there's a bit of a change happening, and, among all the digital platforms, in that they are now looking to, produce original content. And so, for example, Netflix, as a good example, is now putting more of their budget into original content productions than they are into straight acquisitions. So that's changing the landscape a little bit on the distribution side in terms of the digital world. Interestingly, I can speak to the international side. Public broadcasters have been a little bit frustrated by the fact that the digital platforms have been so aggressively acquiring films, documentary films that they have historically had access to. And so there's some really interesting and creative things happening in the international market to allow broadcasters to continue to compete for these films. And I think Sundance this year is really going to be an interesting place to see these changes play out a little bit. We're going into it thinking that, the digital platforms paid really astronomical sums of money for a handful of documentaries last year. And when you look at how those films did at the box office, it wasn't necessarily, they didn't do as well as some people had predicted. And those companies didn't recoup their investment at the box office. So what that's going to mean in terms of some of these high-profile Sundance films, it's going to be interesting to see. But I would add to what Orly said that I think it is a fantastic time to be distributing documentaries because I think there's more of an appetite in the international market. I'm seeing that not only public broadcasters, but we're seeing public pay TV broadcasters come on more strongly and looking to acquire documentaries. So, it's part of why we love what we do. It's a very dynamic industry, and I think the revenue streams are very fluid. I would also echo what Orly said about the educational market. The educational market is a really vibrant market for not only those Sundance films and those high-profile Joe Berlinger films, but those documentaries that really have both that entertaining and compelling component, but also that educational component.
Christine or anybody, you want to say what the range of what Netflix and Amazon are paying for docs these days? From low to high or high to low? Or? Well, I mean, you have to name and film.
Netflix will pay as low five figures and as high 6 and 7, all depending on who's made the movie, what it is, and their algorithm and the festival premiere. And I think it should be noted for anyone listening that the Amazon Festival Stars program, I mean, that's built-in fees guaranteed that you don't need a sales agent to access, and that's something to be careful about when choosing to work with people who take commissions for your deals.
What is that? Say that again, Orly. What is that? The Amazon what?
The Amazon Festival Stars program is basically if the film gets into certain film festivals, and depending on the section, it'll get a guaranteed fee plus revenue share, depending on your category. So either $25,000, $75,000, $100,000, or for the world, $200,000, and that's just a guaranteed bunch of money you pocket. Plus, you make a rev share depending on how many people view your movie. But not everyone's going to access that deal. That's for films in certain A-list festivals such as Toronto and Sundance and South by Southwest and Tribeca for the moment. And we'll see how they expand it, if they do.
You know, the other thing that strikes me today, especially listening to all of you, that a young filmmaker that took his, older Canon 5D or new camera, whatever, and he goes out and he makes a film. And he spends a year and a half or 2 years, and he maxes out his credit card. He borrows money from his mom and dad or his friends or whatever. And now he's got $100,000 in this film, and he still hasn't cleared the music rights, and he's got whatever rights. And he has a pretty good film, but it seems to me like he has another barrier to jump over financially in order to really get the film out there. I don't know if anybody, hiring a publicist, doing advertising.
All that should be budgeted up front. I mean, if you're going to make a movie, first of all, you shouldn't be making a movie if you can't clear the music. I see this all the time. I've gotten films that are wall-to-wall music, and I say, have you cleared the rights? And they go, what do you mean? So it's kind of astonishing that people can make really good movies and be ignorant of an essential part of the process. That said, to go back to your earlier question, it's always been a good time to be a documentary filmmaker if you're from Canada or any of the other countries around the world that subsidize the arts. It doesn't look like we're going in that direction here, but by the same token, 2 years ago, you didn't have Apple Music paying money for nonfiction. I mean, we did 4 films with Apple Music last year. They're voracious. They have a mandate to do programming, and as Christine said, they're going to do a lot of original programming. But
what were the 4 films, Richard? What kind of films did you do with Apple Music?
We did the Clive Davis documentary, a film called Bang, the story about Burt Burns. We qualified a film for them called about Bad Boys and Puff Diddies. I'm not even sure what to call them. Puff Daddies.
Were these pickups by them, or did they come in early?
They were pickups by them. Yeah. Yes.
I love the Burt Burns movie, by the way.
It's terrific. We actually sold that to them. We represented the rights on that as well. It's a terrific story and lovely people as well. So there's a lot more competition for eyeballs, a lot more outlets for eyeballs as well, a lot more resources.
So a film like Burt Burns, though, if you had the chance to educate people, if you could play some of the music, people would know the music that Burt Burns was responsible for. But when you say the name Burt Burns today, and that's part of what the film is about too, I mean, people don't really know who he is or what he did. It's not like, I don't want to mention any other names, but he's not really a well-known producer outside of the music business. And so how does a film like that do? Can you give us a clue of what it did at Apple, and then where else? Is that the end of life for it, or are you able to make a TV sale, or what happened to a film?
Apple got a terrific response for it. It's also available on iTunes, and those are 2 separate deals. We actually had a fairly substantial release plan in place and abbreviated it because of the nature of the deal with Apple. So we got fairly good exposure theatrically, and it would have gotten more, but part of the terms of the relationship with Apple was to reduce that so they could have it available sooner than otherwise. And so as a result, because of We'd made some deals with theaters. We had to honor certain windowing, wanted to make sure there was no conflict between being in theaters and being available on VOD. We abbreviated the theatrical. So it's hard to say. It's also in this world, in a lot of the work that we do, specifically with a lot of the social issue documentaries that we work on, evaluating the success based on box office numbers is really deceptive. Because in some cases, the point is to make the issue more visible. So it's not a direct dollar return. I mean, we worked on a film with Rocco called Trapped, which was about the restrictive reproductive legislation in Texas, the Trapped laws. So the idea there wasn't to say, let's make sure that whatever we spend, we get back twofold. The idea was, how can we make this issue more prevalent? We did, in fact, we did a film a few years ago called Pandora's Promise, which oddly enough was a pro-nuclear energy movie. And the mandate there was to make sure that the next time the New York Times ran an article on the future of energy, they at least mentioned nuclear power. And in fact, there was an op-ed that referred to the movie, so box office became almost irrelevant because it was funded by basically philanthropy. Or business, depending upon your perspective on it. And the idea was to make sure that the issue became part of the conversation. So there's a lot of different standards for measuring success in what we do.
One of the questions just came in here over the transit. I'm not sure whether it came from the tab, because I'm not seeing questions coming from the tab, but I am getting some text from people. What advice would you have for filmmakers who, I mean, to me, it goes back to the same question of, Richard, your answer is, you should be budgeted for that. Well, obviously, in a music film, you have to know about music
Not just Richard's
clearance.
answer. My answer too, though, build in 10 to 20% of your budget to outreach. Forget after the clearing music to outreach. Get your movie out there. You didn't make the documentary so that nobody could see it. You have a full plan to get your movie out there, regardless of whether it gets bought, and you build that into your budget.
Let me put it this way: if in what business would somebody say, "I'm going to take this pencil. I have a great idea for a pencil. I'm going to raise $100,000 from my friends and family to make pencils." And then you have a warehouse full of $100,000 worth of pencils and say, okay, now how do I get these into Staples? That's not a business plan. That's lunacy. But every day people do that because this is art. And so you just say, if hope, and hope is not a strategy. You got to have hope, but you have to have a plan. So you have to commoditize it in a certain sense. So here's the commodity. How am I going to get it into the marketplace? You can't do it for free. If you're making a budget and you're hoping to get into Sundance, well, what if you do get into Sundance? Have you got a budget for a publicist? Have you got a budget to travel your cast? Have you got a budget to print postcards and make sure everybody knows that you're screening? I mean, these are fundamental aspects of the holistic view of making a movie now. It's not just, I'm going to make a movie and the distributor will handle it. You're not being financed by a studio and then take care of everything. You have to take it. If you're a producer and you haven't anticipated how you're going to get it into market to the end user, then you're not really producing in this century.
Can you give, if you don't sell your film to Netflix for 6 figures, and we know that they pay a lot less too, but how would you suggest to a filmmaker or somebody that you're pitching and saying, give me money to make a film, the kinds of money that they can expect on a social issue documentary film that doesn't have Neil Young in it,
Can I jump in here? Go ahead, Orly, whoever that was. I have a slightly different take on this when it gets to be my turn. Go ahead, Orly.
I was just going to say, there are plenty of films that didn't go to Sundance that, a lot of us didn't even hear of, that are speaking about an issue that people care about, Lyme disease or a social justice issue that people care about, and there are audiences across the country and around the world that can be tapped into through educational distribution, through social media, through organizational and community outreach, and this is the bread and butter of both the activist part of the documentary and the revenue, remuneration part of the distribution.
Jonathan?
John.
This is all kind of like a little bit from the tower, no offense to all of us. I've made movies from the ground up, and you don't always have enough to get to the end when you do what you can do. Now, some things are really, you have to plan for some things. You might have to know what you have or what you don't have. You shouldn't go into a movie without knowing that you need to deliver the movie, that you have to, get, money to go to a festival. You need shoes. It's like, that's all true. But I work up, both sides of the street, and on the narrative fiction side, there's almost no veil. It's about the money. It's about the money. It doesn't matter if you're doing an art film or an action movie. It doesn't take many scratches to get to the point where it's about the money. And so when you build the model for that movie, it's about the money. There, you're basically criminally responsible if you don't take that into account. Now, you can choose a risk profile, and I spend really a substantial amount of time in my life discussing, managing, estimated, gauging, defending risk profiles. And part of the strategy of making movies is you have to determine what risk profile is appropriate given the nature of the market, and that's a whole other conversation for another panel. With documentaries, again, this is my touching the elephant at the toenail. But one of the great things about documentaries, in my experience with them, is that they're not all about the money. So, they're always somewhat about the money. But there are people who want to make a movie. Standing in the Shadows of Motown was financed by, after 14 years of looking by the filmmakers, financed by an amateur bass player who happened to sell his company to Cisco Systems and bought himself a present and happened to be sitting next to somebody on a plane, and they both were James Jamerson fans and phone. There was $3 million. Just like that, after 14 years. And the movie went on to be a fantastic triumph by many standards.
So how is that not about the money? It doesn't get made without...
Because it wasn't about the money. I mean, that one wasn't about the money to get it back. I mean, you have to that's about maybe how you get the money. But there was no concern. We didn't have to sit down and run spreadsheets on how you were going to get the return on that money. On Chuck Workman's movie, The Source, which is, arguably one of the great movies about Allen Ginsberg and Kerouac and William Burroughs and Ken Kesey, who we took to Sundance, another whole show. But that was Hiro Yamagata financed the movie because he was a fan of Kerouac or Burroughs, I can't remember which, and he was a successful artist in his own right and financially well off, and he gave Chuck a couple of $1 million. So these movies aren't financed for the purpose. On a smaller scale, some of the social documentaries and some of the issue-oriented documentaries, a lot of them have soft money, and they do obviously want revenue back, and I'm not saying people should turn around the money, but if it gets to the point where the level of financial address on this kind of filmmaking is equal to the more mundane kind of financial address on movies that are overtly made more for that purpose, then I think it's a sad day.
Well, I don't think anyone's saying that, and I think that I don't think anyone's saying that. And also, there's a correlation between money and getting the film out there. If you don't need to get the money back, so much the better. You still need the money to get the movie out there, and so don't just hope and pray, but have a plan. The whole point of making the film was for it to be seen, and that doesn't happen by itself.
Ori and I worked on 2 movies together. We were here by David Weissman and Bill Weber, and Invisible War, Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering. Both amazing movies, fabulous, terrific, brilliant movies. And neither one of those was, they didn't sit down and go, how can we get our, the maximum amount of money back on these movies? I mean, they just didn't. It wasn't in the equation.
Well, on this note,
I don't think you disagree with that at all.
I would like to add, Chuck, just on a quick note, that I think one of the things that every filmmaker should be doing when they start to make their film is get the website up immediately and start collecting contact information for everybody that they're talking to about the film everybody that is coming on board to support the film, because I think we'd all agree a lot of the filmmakers, almost all the filmmakers we work with, are getting very creative about how they get their films funded. And they're having to wear all these hats as a documentary filmmaker, which includes these days making sure you know who your supporters are, who your audience is going to be, and getting that information in the door as soon as possible, because we all, in our various ways, Orly will want that doing the festival distribution, that spreadsheet of festivals that has been tracking the film and wants to know where it is. We are more and more working with that kind of information in the international market. We're working with a film right now that Yale Melamede is producing called Straight Curve. It's a wonderful story about kind of the issue of, in the fashion industry, including different body types, right? So it's a social issue film. It features a number of models, different size models, who have their own Instagram and Facebook following. And that information is becoming more important to distributors as we go out and make our pitches to them in the international market, that there is this cache of information that they could have access to, people who are supporting the film. And, as a filmmaker, involving people in the process, in the production process of getting your film made, helps to engage people around, your process, issuing the film. For these social issue documentaries, there are organizations that want to come in. So, it's the reality of the market today is social media becomes more important to the distribution piece of your film. You're really connecting early on via social media with your audiences and your supporters.
Well,
and that includes both individuals and organizations.
We're at the hour and 7-minute mark right now, and I think we probably could go on for another couple hours, but then again, I think most people wouldn't want us to. But I think this information has been fabulous, and I want to thank my guests very much. Thank you, Christine, Orly, Richard, Jonathan, and I also want to again thank my sponsors who make this possible. Pond 5. If you go to my website, you see that video at the beginning. All those clips came from Pond 5. They're a wonderful resource. And LumaForge, this program is actually on a hard drive. The first jellyfish that was ever purchased, I happen to have it, and it's running on their jellyfish. And Media Central, Jay, I've used your crews. They're the best all over the world. Guys, stick around for just a minute. I'm going to log off here, and thank you so much. Tune in 2 weeks from today, January 23rd, Oscar nomination day. Hopefully we're going to have some of the top filmmakers in the world talk about their new nominations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chuck.